Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kathy Hawks, Senior Associate Dean for External Engagement here at MIT Sloan, and I couldn't think of a better day to talk about principled, innovative leadership that the world needs. And so we have a bunch of shining examples of that today. So just on the heels of last week, we opened an office in Bangkok, Thailand as a school, and everyone there wanted to talk about the US election for sure. And they are looking to MIT for that leadership in the days, years, and months ahead. So thank you for being here. Thank you to our partners in the MIT Leadership Center, Sloan Women in Management, the consulting and VC clubs partnering on our event today. We are joined by Ruby Chandy, undergrad 82, SM 89, and as CEO of Lumina Advisory Services, moderated in a conversation with Professor Nelson Repenning, also an alumnus, PhD 96. So thank you both for being here. Just a few housekeeping items. You have a card with you. If you think of a question as time goes on today, please feel free to jot it down, and our staff will grab those and share them at the Q&A portion after the discussion today. We are recording the session, and so it will be distributed to all of you that have registered for the event today. So a more detailed introduction of Ruby. She has held sector and divisional general management leadership roles in high industry, high value, and life science companies, including Paul, Dow Chemical, Thermo Fisher, Boston Scientific, and Millipore. She has extensive experience in innovation, commercial, and marketing-driven growth strategies, and served as Chief Marketing Officer at Dow Chemical. Ruby has over 15 years of experience on public boards and is a very committed volunteer to the school, is on the MIT Corporation Visiting Committee for the Sloan School, is on the Dean's Executive Board, and also is a former alumni board member. Thank you so much for being here. Over to you, Nelson.
All right, thank you, Kathy. Ruby, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Nelson.
Well, they'll get that sorted out. Why don't we get started with just a little bit of your history. If you could give us sort of the abridged version of your life story that led you up today. We'll get to your fabulous career in a moment. And if I could make a second request, if you maybe linger a little bit on your years at Sloan and your sort of first career choices when you leave, because I know there are lots of people in the room right now that are exactly at that juncture in their career and probably thinking pretty hard about their choices they're going to make once they leave Sloan.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, Nelson and his team. I'm happy to be here with all of you. I remember sitting in classrooms like this when distinguished speakers came to speak at Sloan when I went here. And, there would be obviously big people, CEOs, managing directors of consulting firms or other types of advisory firms, investment banking heads. And I was always found it very interesting, often found it really inspiring. But I have to say, usually I couldn't really see the connection between me sitting in that chair over there and them with their incredible careers. I just didn't see how that path would work. As Nelson said, just to give you a thumbnail of who I was when I came to Sloan, I was an engineer by background, material science engineering from MIT. And I worked for almost 4 years as an engineer and an engineering supervisor, hands-on in the lab, technology development. I came to Sloan, like many of you probably, to try to move into the business side. And even though I said I wanted to do business, I can't say I had much of an understanding of it. I didn't have role models, parents, or relatives who were in the business side. Most people in my family were in education or medicine, and business was just an unknown. So yes, I sat in these classes, not only listening to those folks, but trying hard to think about how I too could follow in some of those pathways. In speaking with Kathy and Nelson and their teams, we thought it'd be interesting to have this discussion today be mostly about that path, not just about the final destination and what you accomplish at the end of your career, but what happens on the way, and maybe especially in the first few years, 5, 15 years after business school, because those are the times when there could be a lot of career transitions. Some of my classmates, very few, They went into something when they left Sloan and stayed in that something. I mean, I have a couple of classmates in consulting at Bain and Deloitte who did it as summer jobs and stayed in it for 35 years. I wasn't that somebody. I had a number of different jobs in different industries, in different functions. So again, I'm happy to talk about that, and hopefully we'll have at some, about half an hour in, some real interaction with questions and what's on your mind as well. But it's interesting because if you think of it as an opportunity, it's really about figuring out what you're good at and what you like and what satisfies you, and that's hopefully some of what I can talk about today. Just a little more about my background. As I said, I came here as an engineer, and when I came to Sloan with my quantitative background, I could have thought about operations or finance, but I really came hoping to broaden myself. So I concentrated in marketing and strategy. And after summer job and after Sloan, I went into consulting. I didn't really think of consulting as something I wanted to do for a career, but I definitely thought it would help me broaden and learn about business and see a lot of things. And to make sure that happened, I liked marketing a lot. I liked strategy and marketing. When I went to McKinsey, I asked them to put me into consumer marketing. So I spent time doing things you wouldn't expect. People sitting in this room, worked with a TV production company, worked with supermarkets, worked with big box stores. And it was all interesting. It was interesting work. It taught me a lot about consumer marketing. Happened to be the reason why I kept going in marketing. And eventually, at some point, others in firms I worked at said to me, "Do you want to be a chief marketing officer?" I did not know anything about being a chief marketing officer, but when you build up experience like that, you're able to take some of these sideways steps and do interesting things. In my 3 years working in consumer marketing, 2.5, 3 years, I enjoyed it. I learned a lot, but I also learned that I liked something that was deeper. We've spent a lot of time thinking about pricing, important things, please don't get me wrong, important things, pricing, shelf space, shelf position, things like that. And maybe being from a technology background, I thought that there was just so much more and so many more levers to pull if you were trying to sell a technical product. So at some point, I knew that consumer marketing wasn't right for me. Again, I'm trying to maybe show you a little bit of thought processes of, you figuring out what really you like, what engages you, what intrigues you. And also, the second thing that I learned about myself, a theme that I come back to repeatedly in my career is thinking versus doing. When I was an engineer, I was doing all the time, right? I mean, don't get me, you're thinking about what you're doing, but you're not thinking big visionary thoughts. You're not worried about, the macroeconomics and the market and the competitors. You're kind of working on your project. And I learned that wasn't satisfying for me. I would get upset. I was outside of Chicago in a big engineering organization, and we'd get directions to stop working on a project or start up a project. All of a sudden, I'd say, "Who's making these decisions?" And they'd say, "It's marketing." That's why I wanted to get into marketing. But I did learn that being able to think about the why of something was as important for me as the doing of it. But then when I was at McKinsey, I got the opposite learning, which was that just doing the visionary work, the analysis, the strategic work, while really great for my brain and really interesting, wasn't enough. I felt that I was constantly thinking about, well, we gave that great book. Did they do anything with it? If they did, how did it work? Did they implement it? Did it work? Were they successful? Did they turn the company around? Did they start growing? And it became increasingly frustrating that, I couldn't figure that part out. Not only what did they do, but how did they do it, and could I do it? So when I left McKinsey, I really wanted to get into line of business, get into a business role. And that's how I ended up first as a marketing manager, and then over time adding functions and becoming a general manager. So let me stop there for now. Again, a lot more career after that, but maybe just tells you how some twists and turns, in terms of getting to where I ended up.
So perfect segue. So let's fast forward a little bit. You've had some big jobs at some fabulous companies. Love to hear maybe a little bit about that progression, but also the sort of follow-on piece of the question is, Our motto is here, principled, or our mission is principled, innovative leaders who change the world. So along that path, do you have one or two really formative experiences that helped you think or define the way you think about leadership, particularly as a senior person in a large, complex organization?
Yeah, I would say that a few things that again I kept running into over the course of my career that I learned eventually were things that that impacted my career and that I had to learn and be good at. I talked about thinking and doing, but also I started to realize that risk taking was critical. I didn't think of it as risk taking. I thought of it as making decisions, either within a job or to change jobs, or even when I got to board positions. But I think that I learned that again, if I wanted to do what I wanted to do, which was continue in line management, getting to the C-suite, that again, I'm Asian by background. I'm Indian. I think I see some folks who are maybe from that part of the world as well. I wasn't brought up to be a risk taker, and I wasn't really brought up to be really clear and loud about my convictions. In fact, if anything, you act graciously, right? And you give way, particularly if you're talking to people higher up in the organization or in the hierarchy. So I had to learn to do those two things. But the way I learned really was more by running into obstacles. So for example, my first role after McKinsey was a company called Millipore, a filtration company that some of you may have heard of. Started out in marketing, added other functions, and became a general manager. And quick story in the other story about, I also learned that I am someone, I learned over time, who likes taking the worst house in the best neighborhood. I happened to work for great companies, but I usually ended up running a broken business. And it was a lot of stress for 12 months, 18 months. You'd be, getting a team together, figuring out what you had to fix, trying to fix it. You often had customers who were very angry with you because of whatever had happened before. So you're going to customers and apologizing and telling them you'll do better, trying to pull people together to use best practices and fix the business. Very stressful, as I said. I would be moaning through that whole time about how much travel I was doing and how difficult it was. But I learned at Millipore after 7 years there that when the business is doing well, over time we built a great team, people from the company and outside the company, put in good process, did some incredible innovation, breakthroughs. I learned that, when the company was running well, I got bored. So think about that as well. Are you somebody who likes fixing things? Are you like somebody who likes incrementally improving things, or are you somebody who gets bored by some of that? But after that 7 years, I tried to find other opportunities within the company, and just for whatever reason, there was nothing available. And a friend of a family friend knew about Boston Scientific and said, would you want to go? They're looking for someone to run a business. Would you run a business there? That was great, except it was a urology business. I went from being in the fab for a semiconductor company to standing in the operating rooms while people were doing urology procedures. And that's what I mean about taking a risk. I knew nothing. I knew nothing about medicine or about that kind of product or that kind of customer base. But I did learn as I took that job and later taking other jobs that were totally unrelated to what I'd done before, that taking the risks scary. Very scary. Sometimes you wondered why, can I succeed? Because I don't know this area. Selling to a semiconductor engineer, which is all about logic and technology, and we can save you money and we can save you time, was very different at that time. I don't want to misspeak if any of you are doctors or have relatives who are doctors, but at that time, selling to doctors was much more about wining and dining them first, before you talked about the product. You did get to talk about the products at some point, but first you really had to, socialize and do a very different kind of relationship building. So that's what I mean about, take the risks. Like, you will learn how to do those things. A lot of people, I think, are risk averse or worry that if they haven't done the job before, they cannot be successful at the job. And one of my key messages for all of you is really be willing to take the risks, because you wouldn't be here if you weren't really smart and good problem solvers, and you will figure out those opportunities. So I think that was critical. And the last thing, Nelson, I wanted to say was my third and last theme is about network and connection. Everything you do, whether it's running that little function you're in, my first marketing manager job, I had 2 people reporting to me, or whether it's running a division or running a big company or being on a board, you will be more effective if you build relationships with your peers, the people who report to you, the people ahead of you. It took me a long time to learn that and do it, because again, given my cultural heritage, given maybe the fact that I tend to be a little introverted at first and shy, it took a long time to realize that as human beings, you can be a lot more effective if you have that personal connection. Now, when I go on a board of directors, even though it's not a social enterprise, I try hard to build connections outside of the board. If I'm in the same city as someone else, I'll ask if they can have coffee or have dinner. Or, even in the first board I went on, I was 1 woman and 8 men, and it was my first board. I didn't know what being a board director was. But I happened to fly back and forth to Chicago from Philadelphia with a very experienced CEO who had been on the board for a while. Again, I didn't do it on purpose. I wish I'd known enough to do it, but we built a relationship just from waiting in the terminal together, being on the flight together, waiting at the terminal and taking the cars back and forth. And I tell you, I ended up not only learning so much from him and having him be a fan, but he eventually invited me to be on his board. So I just tell you, I mean, 2/3 of my job changes have been through people I met that I didn't know, at one point. So, and even if they're through recruiters, those recruiters have to get to know you. So making the time to connect and network and become friends. And I'm not saying you're going to be best friends, that's not it at all, but having a human understanding of each other, that's really critical.
Yeah, fabulous. So we will get a couple questions about your board service, but let me ask one more before we get there, which is, we talk a lot here at MIT about collaboration across disciplines, and it's only going to get more important as technologies, inhabit more of what organizations do. In my experience, tech companies like the ones you work for are often not so good at that, particularly as it relates to the less technical parts. So I'm very curious, particularly since you came through the marketing ladder, what lessons you learned about getting different functions and different disciplines that may have wildly different backgrounds to work together effectively.
Yeah, I would say it's interesting. I have no idea why this was important to me, but from a very early stage of my career, it was important to me to have different voices in the room. And I didn't think of it as diversity back then, because when I went to Sloan and started working, it was a long time ago. The diversity issues weren't as clear. But I liked the idea of having people with different opinions in the room. People who would be naysayers, who would find the issues with your thinking. So over time, I found that the way to get that was to bring in people with different backgrounds. So that first job in marketing, I ended up hiring a consumer marketing person because I had learned that they think differently. I ended up hiring people with marketing from different types of companies. Now, it happened maybe by chance that as I did that kind of hiring, it ended up being a diverse group. Maybe, some women, some different nationalities, but I wasn't looking for that at that time. I mean, I wasn't going and saying I need a woman who does this. I was looking for people who had different experiences. So for me, that came kind of naturally. I think I'm a big disciple of Andy Grove. I don't know if any of you know his name. He was the long-term CEO of Intel when Intel was the company in semiconductors. He wrote a book called Only the Paranoid Survive. And maybe it was just reading that early in my career that I thought, you need people who don't go with the groupthink, who ask questions, who try to bring up risks. It's painful to be in that room, in that team, when people are trying to poke holes in what you're thinking, but it's the best way, I think, to catch all the problems before you put something out that fails or a customer finds the problems. So that's how I dealt with it, but I also think I am a connector in the sense that even I say I'm introverted and so on, but it makes me uncomfortable if I'm in a team room, again, and there are only 3 people talking. So I used to kid around and say, I'm going to call on you sooner or later, so you might as well just start giving us your input. And I was known throughout my career for at some point going, Jane, you haven't said anything. I know you're thinking about this. What do you think? So those are some of the ways you can try to encourage collaboration. Make sure you have diversity of thinking. Make sure you bring in other functions. It isn't easy to do. It is not easy to do, especially in technical companies. I mean, there are reasons that marketing and sales often are at clashes, right? They are trying to do different things. Sales would like you to give the lowest price possible to a customer, and marketing's there, if you're doing your job right, to get the highest profit margin. So you argue over pricing, you argue about how to launch products. Manufacturing and R&D, right? R&D often would like to make the most elegant, formidable product. That might be hard to manufacture if not thought through carefully. So there is a reason those functions operate for different optimal situations, but it's also the reason that they may not see eye to eye. But you win the best if you have the knowledge base that all of them bring. So I mean, it doesn't matter if you're in your first role or a CEO. There's nothing in business, in any industry, that you do as an individual, unless you're in an incredibly pure analytical role. To succeed in business, you really have to run teams, informal teams sometimes. Not named teams, but it's a team. A board is a team. An executive group is a team, and so are the formal teams.
Fabulous. So let's talk about boards. You have deep experience on the boards of several big companies. I think in the business press, we hear a lot about boards, but I think for most of us, unless you're in the room, it remains a little bit of a mysterious process, both in terms of what they actually do and what the interactions are like, in that room behind the closed doors. So if you can, give us a little window into what boards do and what it's like to be a member of one.
Sure. If you don't mind, I actually wrote down a McKinsey definition of what a board is, because I wanted to be sure to do this correctly for you. A board of directors, and every public company has a board of directors, and nowadays many private equity companies, private companies also tend to have some sort of board. And the reason for that is they're an independent governance entity that oversees and supports management. I think the value of it is independence. They can think outside the box. They can challenge the thinking of management. But they're also there on behalf of shareholders and other stakeholders. So as a director, I'm supposed to think most of all about shareholders, because they are the owners of the company. But also, it's part of my role and job and the role of the board to think about the communities the companies operate in. If we all did our jobs, there would be less environmental disasters, because you are supposed to think about those sort of things. You're supposed to think about customers, right? Who you serve. You're supposed to think about competitors, the ones who could damage you, and so on. So the idea, again, is that you really are responsible for all stakeholders and helping that management team maximize value creation. The CEO creates strategy and executes strategy, but the board oversees that strategy, asks questions, asks for outside data that supports the strategy. And a colloquial description we use is nose in, hands out. We're not supposed to run the company. Management runs the company. But you ask the questions, and you try to get that gut instinct and data backup of whether the direction that the company is going in and is correct. The most important job the board does, other than oversee strategy, is hire, fire, and evaluate the CEO and the other senior members of the C-suite. And they also oversee culture and talent building and talent assessment and talent development for the senior team, and usually a couple of levels below the senior team, because those are the people who will become the senior team someday. So that's what we do. But to do that, we meet several times a year. We also work in committees to do detailed work, audit work or compensation work. So it's real work. I mean, but it is at a high level. It is great. My first board, all of you, as you progress in your career, when you're mid-career or little early stage of later career, I really encourage you to see if your company will support you to join a board, because it forces you to think the way directors think, the way shareholders think, the way lenders think, right? And it's hard to think that way when you're buried in doing your job. So it really produces, I mean, CEOs find that being on somebody else's board creates value for them. They see best practices, and they see how if, again, even as a CEO, you're buried in what your company's doing, and this forces them up. So it's a great experience, but something that you can only do after you've had operating experience for a while. And, but again, your experiences create value for another company.
Yeah, fabulous. So as you permit me one slightly off-script question, I'm sure we have many aspiring entrepreneurs in the audience, as we always do here at Sloan, who will hopefully be reporting to boards at some point in their company's future. Any advice to them about the proper care and feeding of their board members to make it a successful and productive relationship?
This is true for any company, not just entrepreneurs, but I'm a mentor in residence for the University of Pennsylvania Innovation Center, which essentially is a group that helps to stand up companies coming out of their medical school and their engineering school. So, we meet every month and they present to us. And I would say the things that we see most often, I guess you could call us their board of directors. They may have a different board of directors. But, for any company and any leader anywhere, your biggest assets and the easiest things to waste or not to get the maximum out of are time and people, right? They're only 24 hours in the day, no matter who you are. And you can only do what your people are able to help you do. So entrepreneurs often have very limited teams. They're small, they're scrappy. And often we find that they are trying to do way too much. And that's twofold. One is that they usually have a great technology, right? Coming out of a medical school or an engineering school or dental school or whatever. And they think of all the myriad of things they can do with the technology. But remember, you can only bring one or two things to market at a given time. That's all you have the resources to do. That's all the customer can embrace. That's actually a very freeing thought if you allow yourself to think it. You should still talk to venture about all the things your technology can do, and someday this will be $1 billion or $10 billion business. But what you can work on at any given time to bring to market, to develop, to take to market is just one or two things. So we spend so much time trying to tell them that they really have to flesh out the thinking around their first item to market or their first and second item to market. Flesh it out. Go talk to customers. Try to find out what you really have to develop. And then the other thing is we talk to them a lot about fundraising, obviously, fundraising and how to do that effectively. And so if you have any communications classes as you go through business school or marketing classes, which are good for talking about value creation and value proposition, take those to heart. Some of you may think that marketing is fluffy, and I suppose it could be, but if you do marketing well, it's really the quantification of the customer benefit. That's all it is. All the rest of it is just bringing the products that do that. But you have to be able to quantify what the customers get out of it. And if you quantify correctly and you're really bringing something great that gives them that huge value creation, pricing isn't a problem. I mean, things grow and things have huge profit. But it's really understanding what the customer's thinking and then being able to target your product towards it, right? Because that's difficult too.
Right. Just as a side note, I'm quite confident that our marketing faculty would not describe their work as fluffy here, nor their classes.
Not at MIT, but in technical companies, you get that a lot. I'm telling you
sure.
that. It's amazing. The R&D groups and manufacturing have no idea what, in technical companies, I'm only talking about, technology companies, what marketing does.
Yeah. So in the last decade or so, I think the world of management broadly construed has woken up to the fact that the demographics of senior management and boards don't match the demographics of society as a whole. And I think at least recent evidence suggests this is particularly acute in the boardroom where it remains predominantly male, and I think less than a quarter of the members of Fortune 500 boards are female. How do you think about the move towards diversity? How's it impacted your experience of a board member? And probably most importantly, what are strategies to continue to sort of move the arc in a more diverse direction that more matches society as a whole?
The percentage of female board members is now somewhere between 20 and 25%. And that number is high compared to when I started looking at boards, so about 15 years ago. And for many years, it was stuck in the 10 to 13% range for a long, long time. So there's been progress. There's been progress, particularly, I think, in the last few years as issues of Me Too and DEI, raised in visibility. But it's still low. And if you think about the number of women running Fortune 500 companies, I don't remember the exact number, but it's only a dozen or two. It's not more than that. And even in C-suites, depending on the industry you're in, you may see more in consumer companies or perhaps, or in retail companies. But certainly the kind of companies I worked in, very, very few women in the C-suite. So I do want to say that progress has been made. And I think what people are seeing, let's take boards as one organization, is it's opened up the doors. Instead of just looking at CEOs or CFOs, it's opened up the doors to people looking for more specific expertise. And it's not because they say we need a woman, so let's go look for somebody in this space. It's as the world is changing. The changes that are happening in the world are complex, sometimes scary, but they also open up a lot of opportunities, because now you need people on boards who understand AI or cyber. You need people on boards, and for some companies that understand climate change and green technology. Same in biotech, you need people who really understand the science. So, as people look for experts in these fields, it's opened them up to the idea that you can get experts. By the way, they're experts who are women. They're experts who are of underrepresented minorities. So I do think the fact that, it's no longer about that CEO who runs companies, but about getting people who know certain things. That's really made a big difference. There's also governance. As I said, the board is responsible for governance, and part of governance is you want to reflect both in the management team and your board, your customer base, right? Or your communities. So there's something called the Rooney Rule. Came from Dan Rooney, a football coach, actually. And the Rooney Rule is that when we tell recruiters now that when you bring us a slate, it's got to have women on it. It's got to have underrepresented minorities on it. Doesn't mean the best person still wins for the job. But if you never see those people, how can you even consider them? So companies, that's part of governance, that you can insist that Rooney Rule be implemented and executed. So we are making progress, but it is slower than would be ideal. But again, what I say I mentor women, I mentor underrepresented minorities, and I try to say, again, at the end of the day, the two things that you can control are deliver performance, because if you want to be on a board or want to be a CEO or want to be something very high up in the organization, that's your best thing. Your story to tell is about the performance you've delivered. And then the second thing is network and connect. Like I said, make the time, find a way to have a cup of coffee, find the way to have a quick lunch somewhere. I was like all of you, again, being Asian, I'll blame it on my parents, but I kept my head down and I worked and worked and worked. And I saw, colleagues who did make the time. And again, I was lucky enough that I got most of my jobs through people I knew, but when I left full-time work and I wanted to do more board work and I wanted to break into private equity, which I'd never worked in, I got there, but it took me 12 to 24 months, because I had to start from scratch to build a network in the private equity space. So rather than do that, all in one clump, hopefully all of you will, as I said, grab the opportunity. If you get a chance to change careers or take a lateral step or look for something new, grab it as an opportunity to get to know a lot of people. Every person you meet with, say, can you introduce me to 3 more people? Just build your network. You never know when that'll come in handy. And by the way, it energizes you. You meet people, you learn from them, you hear about them, you tell them about yourself. It's huge, but it's something that some of us have to learn how to do.
All right, last question, and we'll go to audience questions. You have been a very loyal supporter of Sloan, for which we're very grateful. Thank you, including being a member of our exec boards. And it sounds like you do work for institutions that are local to you as well. So any advice for the room about how to be an effective alum? So both to help us, but probably more importantly, so that they get the continued value from the institution that they have, the community they have joined.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if I had followed my own advice, I would have been networking with alums much earlier in my career, right? But again, because I kept my head down and I was busy, it only really became important to me in the last 15 years or so. I think as I got toward, I had done the big jobs or was doing the big jobs, and I started to think about what would I do in the future, it became more important to me to give back. I am the product of a family that prospered through education. If someone hadn't helped my dad get through school and college, then his 8 siblings wouldn't have done well and his kids wouldn't have done well. So education is definitely one of my passions. Mentoring people is one of my passions. So MIT was obvious to me. I mean, MIT is known worldwide, and again, for me, it's particularly interesting that MIT has such a global reach and brings in students from all over. And I also am very involved with a high school for disadvantaged kids in Philadelphia. Because again, someone's got to give them the opportunity to do these things. So it became really important to me 15 years ago, and I started out with the alumni board. I don't know if you know there's such a thing. By the way, speaking about always looking for best practices, Dave did that, Dean Schmidtlein. Wharton has always been, and some other schools like down the street, have been very good about really connecting their alumni, both for themselves, because engaged, connected alumni donate more, but also because the alumni love it. The alumni help each other. It is known, whether if you went from McKinsey or from Harvard Business School, that if you call an alum, they will return your call, because that is how they help each other. So, Dave had seen that at Wharton, and that's how I think he started the alumni board here at MIT. A great stepping stone, by the way, for young or experienced alumni, because it gives you get with other alumni and do hands-on projects, and I loved it. But that started me down that path, and I just enjoyed reconnecting with people I knew, as well as with new young alumni. And there are lots of interesting events that the group that Kathy and her team in OER set up, and then it just becomes natural, I think, that if you want to get more engaged, like now I'm talking with Nelson about the Leadership Center, it bugs the heck out of me that Sloan isn't the first name that comes up when people are looking for leaders in AI, green, climate change. What other school and what other group of people would be best suited to those kinds of technical challenges? So we have to figure out how to, the great work is being done here, the research, the students, but how do we get that word out more? So the nice thing is MIT is diverse enough, broad enough that if you have specific interests, you can get in, you can get involved with that. If you want to do something broadly around alumni, you can do that. But it's another way to network, connect, and enrich yourself. Those may be the alumni who help you find jobs or give you advice on how to succeed in your jobs. So think of it as what's in it for me, and do it. Just do it. Or, like I said, don't wait. You don't have to wait till you're almost done with your career, as I did.
All right, fabulous. Do we have a couple questions from the audience?
I've got one to start us off. You mentioned family throughout your remarks. How do you balance family, time with your loved ones, with your busy career?
It's never easy. Whenever you hear people speak about work and family, especially women, they say people say, can you have it all? And the answer you get, and I think it's the real answer, is you can definitely have it all. You can't always have it all at the same time. So I have a daughter and I have 2 stepdaughters, and we're a very close-knit family, but I will tell you, I had a nanny for most of the time when my daughter was at home, because I was traveling a lot. I always worked in global companies. My husband was an attorney with a Boston-based firm, and then he was able to work from New York and Philly. He didn't travel as much, but he was busy too, so we had a nanny. But more importantly, maybe from a career standpoint, when she was a year old, and I had been traveling or a year and a half old, I don't remember exactly, but I had been traveling like crazy in a general management job, going to Europe a lot for acquisitions, I realized that was not tenable. I mean, and believe me, for me, it was a big decision, because I was on that path to trying to get to, general management and CEO. Luckily, I had a very good relationship with my boss, and talking to him, he found that he could meet a need of the company. They had been looking for a chief marketing officer for a year. It's very hard in technology companies to find marketing officers because you need someone who's done technical work to have credibility. They had, for whatever reason, they hadn't had any luck finding the right person. As I said, I wasn't trained as a chief marketing officer, but he said, do you want to take a lateral step and do this as an assignment? Now, I was really afraid that if I did that, I wouldn't get back to general management. So for me, it felt like a big risk, but I had to do it for my daughter. I just could not travel that much. So for 3 years, I did that. And by the way, it turned out to be a great, great decision in hindsight. But it was tough to make those kinds of decisions. So that's what I mean about you can have everything, but maybe not all at the same time. Or you have to figure out ways to finagle it with nannies and other types of support structures, family, if they're in the area.
Thank you, Ruby. Where in your career did introversion help your career and hold your career advancement back?
You know, where I think it helps your career, it's always been true, but I think it's more and more true that listening is also a superpower. But especially now where, you know, things are so much more complex and it's not enough to just do what was done in the past, right? Look at all the companies, great companies, Intel, IBM. I'm talking about the companies in my space, but you can pick out Southwest, right? Successful for so many years and struggling now. So it is hard now to figure out how to build long-lasting, successful companies. So being able to listen, whether it's to people in your organization or to people outside in the market, to your customers. I do think being an introvert, you know, I like to listen probably more than to speak. But where has it held me back? I mean, I was told in my first job at McKinsey, you have to speak up more. You know, and it's funny, people who are introverted and also maybe by culture brought up that way, when you speak up a lot, you think you're being arrogant and you think you're being, you know, they will think I know better than everyone. I remember the partner on the study, I mean, again, he was very supportive. He said, you can speak up 3 or 4 times as much as you are and you still won't be anywhere close to the loudmouths on the team. That was helpful because the way I was judging how I would be seen was very different from how he saw it. So yeah, I think there's a happy balance. You don't have to cross over to the, you know, the far right of the Myers-Briggs introversion extroversion scale, but it would be helpful if you could inch yourself at least to the middle. And it's doable. You know, we talked about this in Nelson's class the other day about how do you get there. I mean, I said, when I mentor people and what I did for myself, I set myself a goal. In big meetings, you have to say 3 things. Doesn't matter what they are, doesn't matter if they're truly value added, you have to practice. Build the muscle memory by saying 3 things you must speak. So it's sometimes just mechanical things like that. And I tell some people I'm mentoring that today. Because then if you focus on I have to speak, I think you get away from the, oh, is it value add? Oh my gosh, can I say it? You're just like, I have to say something. So let me get it done.
Great. Probably have time for one more.
Final question. What has been your hardest transition in your career and how did you navigate it?
Oh my goodness. I mean, the hardest was that transition to being a chief marketing officer, not just because I saw it as a very high risk, but because I went from being in charge of things, a general manager, everybody reports to you, to someone who had to work as a chief marketing officer. I had a team, but that wasn't the important part. The job of a CXO, C anything, who is not the CEO, is influencing everybody else, your peers. It is hard to go from knowing that at the end of the day you can be the decision maker to knowing you have to influence others and convince others, and particularly in a technology company where they didn't want to do marketing, you know, convince them of the value of what you were bringing for them. I tried a lot of things. Like one of the things I did was my team, and which wasn't a large team, maybe 10 or 15 people, I put 2 in each business. There were 6 big business units. They had smaller business units within them. I basically said, here, you can have 2 of my people. You know, we will come up with the frameworks and the practices and the training, but they're going to help your people succeed. They're going to work on your projects. They're going to train your people how to use this stuff. But essentially, gave them the resources. I told you how time and resources are the hardest thing. I spent a lot of time talking to the division general managers, not the marketing people, because trying to build a relationship, have coffee. I probably spent 6 months not even talking about marketing, just getting to know them. But it was hard. It was really hard for someone who's decision-oriented and fast-paced to slow and realize that. And it probably took me, I did 3 chief marketing officer stints, though 2/3 of my career was in general management, and I finished in general management. But it took me probably until the 3rd stint to, I think, be truly effective, because it was really hard to change. You're changing your internal drive mechanism. It was hard.
All right, great. As always, it goes by too fast. We've come to the end. Ruby, thank you so much for sharing your
Absolutely.
insights with you and your
Thank
ongoing
you
support
all.
of the school.